So, in case you missed my previous video, I've decided to make a couture-inspired dress for my friend's wedding. And I guess this wasn't really intended as a series, but my previous project on this series was a 1950s slip dress based on an original vintage 1950s pattern that I had hoped would be a nice pattern for this project. However, I made a wearable mock-up of that, and when I looked at it, it just wasn't quite what I wanted it to be. I have this decadent, beautiful fabric for this project, and it didn't feel like it was living up to it. And so there was also in the back of my mind, I just couldn't stop thinking about this one pattern I'd seen when I was browsing, which I had decided against because I thought maybe it would be too much, or maybe it didn't fit the vibe. I don't know, something. I talked myself out of buying it and then I regretted it. So I've ordered it now. We have 2 weeks to make this dress. Ah! This is the pattern that I'm talking about. This is a vintage Vogue pattern. That was actually designed by Jacques Heim, who was a Parisian couturier. It's a beautiful, beautiful pattern from 1956 for a formal dress. And it just really something about it just really caught my imagination, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I ordered it, and this is actually, as you can tell, it's not a vintage pattern, but this is from a place called the Vintage Pattern Shop, and I've bought from them before. What they've done was they've basically scanned original vintage patterns, and then they provide you either a printed or a digital copy of that pattern, which in a way is nice because that means that, you know, you're not cutting into original vintage patterns. But this is my project. Oh my god, just look at it. How could I ever talk myself out of buying it? That's ridiculous. Anyway, I'm super excited about it. What is a couture dress? This is a really difficult concept, but basically I've been taking some notes. My Bible for this is, I know a lot about historical dress, but I've not really looked at modern fashion or couture fashion or really anything 20th century much in depth. But this is my Bible for couture fashion, couture sewing really. And this book is called Couture Sewing Techniques by Claire Schaefer. This is one of the first few books I bought, and it taught me so much about making, not just couture, but just making in general. And there's a lot of information on here to the point where it can be a difficult book unless you know what you're looking for. So I was armed with knowing exactly what I'm doing, which is an evening formal wear dress made out of silk. And so I could set out some parameters for my project. And I always start out by taking notes, which you can see here. So I wanted to I read through the introduction again and did all of that. And these are the things that I pulled out that Claire Schaefer mentions that are kind of signals of couture, which are made by hand. That doesn't mean you don't get to use a sewing machine. It just means that a lot of it is made by hand in the sense that working hands are making the largest proportion of it. I have a real qualm with the idea that machine-made things aren't handmade, in the sense that the sewing machine traditionally is something that we still need human hands for a lot of processes to push through, to manipulate. The fabric isn't sewing itself. If you set a seam going on a machine with no other aid, not your hands, nothing, it will not sew a nice seam. How can you say that machine made things? Anyway, that's not the purpose of this video. A few things that she mentioned were wider seam allowances, notches at the seam lines, not the seam allowance lines, a lot of hand basting, understitching by hand, slash darts are balanced, dresses are backed and often unlined. My camera died. A lot of the seam finishings are things like hand over casting or pinking, and hem finishing is usually done in the same way. A lot of hand rolled hems, faced waistbands with silk, sewn in interfacings. There's a lot of work that goes in through hand sewing still into these dresses. And often one of the things that Schaefer pointed out that I really enjoyed is the fact that a lot of us as modern people, if we look at the inside of couture dresses, we think they are messy or unfinished. And that's because we are usually used to seeing a lot of machine finished seams or bound seams or overcast by overlocker kind of things. But the thing that you have to keep in mind is that couture dresses often have a different purpose than everyday modern clothing. Modern clothing has to be made to survive the washing machine, which I will never say that we shouldn't use a laundry machine because it just makes life so much easier. I can't imagine not using the laundry machine, but you wouldn't use it for a formal couture dress because that's not the purpose of these dresses. These dresses are made to be hand washed or hand spot treated, dry cleaned, whatever. They're not everyday garments, and so they don't need the same level of finishing or same degree of finishing on the inside. And just because it might look messy, it doesn't mean that it is messy. So I will be employing as much of this as possible, but I'm also very aware that I have given myself a very short deadline with my indecision, which is a very cat thing to do. So welcome to the channel. I wanted to take 2 last moments to talk about my fabrics for this. I have 2 main fabrics for this, which is a beautiful red silk satin, which I bought in Goldhawk Road in London. It was a huge deal. It's just I love the way it hangs and I love the color. I think it was exactly what I wanted it to be, but it is very lightweight. And so I've also bought 5 meters of silk organza. It's actually a very lightweight kind of open weave one, but it still provides a lot of body to back my silk satin, just because I'm aware that it's too drapey for the kind of dress that I want out of this pattern. However, now that I've received my pattern, I've also noticed that there are 2 components to this dress, which just isn't something I expected and not something that was obvious in the very little information I had of the pattern before I bought it, which is this dress is actually made up of 2 parts. It has an underdress and then an outer dress. So the underdress seems to be very much in line with how couture things are made. It's the couture bodice that has a bit more structure and a bit more support, and then a skirt that also helps sort of fill the role of a petticoat by giving the shape to the outer skirt that is needed. And for this, I've been digging around in my stash and I have located some leftover silk organza for my breathe dress that was just left over, and it has a really good structure because it's densely woven, but it's very lightweight and it's still silk. I mean, I didn't want to use just anything from my stash because I'm putting all this effort into this dress and I've really invested in this outer fabric. I kind of want the under fabric to be the same, if that makes sense. Yes, I'm going to use that silver silk organza, and I'm also using a lining for that in silk. It's more like a haboutai, like a really light silk lining that I've had in my stash for like nearly 10 years. But yes, that means I'm using 4 layers of silk. I don't know how I ended up here, but 2 of them from the stash. Technically they're all from the stash, but 2 of them are from the stash, so I think that'll be fine. But this also means that I have to make 2 dresses in the time of 1, so we need to get started. My first step was to adjust the pattern because unfortunately with vintage patterns they often don't fit my measurements. In this case, this is a size 16, which for a 36-inch bust, that is not my size. I had to add about 4 inches to the bust and the waist for this dress, and I did that to the pattern. I'm starting with the underdress, of course, and so I had to make a mock-up of that. I'm going to do the full underdress first, and then I'll tackle the outer dress because the outer dress sits fully on the underdress, and I would highly recommend, if you're working with a slightly more complex vintage pattern like this, or really just any pattern, read the full of the instructions before you start. It just helps make much more sense of how things fit together. And so I had a look through. I hate this bit because I really don't, often written instructions don't really work for my brain unless I can visually see what I'm trying to do, but it did tell me how this dress is put together. Even if I don't follow it to the T, I know that the outer dress needs to sit on the underdress. So I'm going to tackle that one first. I need to make a mock-up of the bodice. I'm not going to make a mock-up of the skirt. I never do. Once that mock-up is fitted, I will cut it out of the silk organza. I will interline all my pieces together. I'll sew all the seams and we'll go from there. There's nothing quite like making mock-ups at 11 p.m, but we are on a deadline and I cannot hold the top of this by myself, but I have checked it does fit, so you're just gonna have to trust me. But this is the fitted underbodice. First, after I made the alterations to the pattern itself, it was too big, then it was too small, and now I think it's just right. It needs a bit of tension to keep it close fitting to the body, which is good. But I'm going to cut it with, you know, it has 5/8 seam allowance, which is quite large, so I'll still be able to do any small adjustments that I might need to. But otherwise, I think it's good to go, and I really do need to get started with sewing. So my plan now is to also alter the waistline of the skirt to match the waistline of this, to transfer these alterations to the pattern and to cut it all out. And really I needed this underbodice and underskirt done in like the next 3 days, so we'll see. Probably a lot more midnight sewing. So I'm almost done with this underskirt, and I just wanted to show you a cool aspect of it that really does make all the difference. So the skirt has a bit of an odd shape, and that's because most of the volume of this skirt is actually towards the sides and the back. So the sides is this panel that has these seams that also then go into little darts that make this sort of pannier almost like shape, and this side is just plain, but on this side I've done a step that they recommended, which was to add crinoline tape, or sometimes called horsehair braid, to this. You can see my hand stitches here. I thought it'd just be easier to hand stitch it, and it was, but it does immediately just give it so much more shape, like it actually stands away from the body. So there's 2 rows, one at the top and one at the bottom here, and it just helps to give it that extra oomph. So I'm about to add it to the second side, but I just wanted to show you while one side has it and one side does not, so you could kind of see how such a simple thing can make the difference. And then if you keep in mind that this will then have the weight of the outer skirt on it, like it does need a little bit more. And I think that if actually I had a stiffer fabric, like a taffeta or something, this would be even more noticeable. But it is super cool, to the point where I might add some more just to compensate for my choice of fabric. Cool. Okay, so I have made a mock-up of the outer part of the bodice, and I now have 7 days until the wedding, so I do need to get this moving. But I'm really glad I did make a mock-up, because obviously sizing, because I've had to size up the underdress, I'll also have to size up the outer dress, but also because it's just quite a tricky pattern. So if I just show you, this is what the front pattern looks like. And what it reminds me of actually is an 18th century bodice, but that's not what it is. And that's because here at the front, there's this overlap, which is actually this crossover bit of fabric. And then there's a slash in the fabric where it goes under. And then this top here is left open. And you do put like a little bit of boning in here to keep it kind of firm. And then this bottom piece is another pattern piece. And then the back is just this piece here, which is very similar to the under bodice back. And then this is actually an extension of the skirt back that goes up into the back and then actually meets the side front. It's quite a wacky pattern, but it took me a little while to figure this out, so I'm really glad that I did do the mock-up. And I've also, what I now need to do is, even though this fits me, I want to make sure that it's the same size as the under bodice, so I will recompare all of the flat pieces to make sure that when I put the overlayer on the under bodice, I'm not accidentally gathering the under bodice to fit a smaller outer bodice. So yeah, I'm just going to double check some pattern pieces, and then I do need to cut out my silk, which I've been putting off because it's very intimidating, but it just needs to happen. So there's a lot of cutting ahead of me, and I just need to take a deep breath and be in a good headspace to cut silk, and I need to get sewing. I am in utter despair. And so I think it's probably the best time to do a check-in, because it has been a little while since I've checked in on camera in voice. So it is 9:41 p.m, precisely 3 days before the wedding. And I am at my wit's end with this freaking pattern, because it's quite a complex pattern and I had to change a few things about it to make it fit me. But because there's so many different moving pieces about it, it's not as easy as it seems. It's not a simple solution of just adding, you know, an inch to a side seam like I've done before. So this is where the dress stands at the moment. And you might think, that doesn't look too bad. Well, first of all, I hate the silhouette, but I think once I hem it, it'll be a bit better. The front actually doesn't look too bad. I haven't tried it on because it's not actually mounted to the underdress at the moment. It's just draped on the dress form. But where the real issue lies is the back. I don't know what's happened. I genuinely don't know what's happened, but this will not close. I really struggled to get this mid piece and the pleats to lay properly. I think I'm just going to have to unpick the sides here and undo these pleats and let it out. And this just is not going to have the same shape, but it's going to be, number one, what I think will be a more flattering shape on me, and more importantly, something that'll fit me. So instead of trying so desperately to agree to the markings on this pattern to make it work, I am instead going to undo this and just make it work for me. So wish me luck, because other than this, I still have obviously to fix this disaster. Then I have to mount the dress onto the dress. I need to put a zipper in, and I need to hem both layers of the skirt. And I have a day job, so I don't know. Maybe I'll have a dress for the wedding, we'll see. Isn't this the best angle? But I'm about to cut the hem, and I just wanted a moment to immortalize the hem, because I think I'm gonna regret what I'm about to do, but I think I do have to do it. So this dress, and specifically in the pattern instructions, they tell you that the front of the dress should hang about 1 inch off the floor, and then the back should trail to the floor by 2 inches, which is why it's longer. It actually has a little bit of a train, which you can see here. Now, I've got some issues because of the way I cut the fabric and the way it warped. I had already built into the pattern a 4-inch shorter difference because I'm shorter than the pattern was made for. But because of that, for example, particularly on the side seams here, you can see that it didn't really warp as much as on the other sides. Like, it shifted when I was cutting and it shifted when I was sewing, and now it's actually just on the edge of being long enough. So this actually only gives me 1 inch hem from it hanging off the floor. But all of this to say that I think the train on this is just stunning. Like, the way it drapes is so beautiful, and the way it like flows from the back here, even though I had to piece a bit here for one of the panels, it actually isn't super noticeable and it hangs really well. But unfortunately, because this is a dress for a wedding where I'm a guest, I don't actually want it to be too, I feel like having a train is too much. So I am going to make it so that it's even and it's about 1 inch off the floor across the whole of the skirt. So I'm gonna have to cut it off. So just a moment to immortalize the hem. Let's all look at it and see how beautiful it looks. Wow, look at it. It's so beautiful. Before I chop it off. Future cat, I'm sorry. Now the dress is finished and worn, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, I guess, like an end of project pattern review. I feel like I should do more of these, but I had so much trouble with this pattern, and the whole reason is because I had to size it up. So the underdress worked beautifully because it was a much simpler design, but the pattern shapes for the front of this dress are kind of crazy, and even though I added as much as I expected to the sides and everything, it just wasn't fitting how it should be. And I also think that my fabric, even though it was interlined with the silk organza, was too lightweight, and I think it just either needed to be fused rather than just tacked together like I did. I went through all that trouble of hand tacking it together, but it still meant that the middle bits weren't long-term together. So I think either it had to be fused or it just had to be a stiffer silk for the outside. Please excuse any staining. This has been worn for about 10 to 12 hours for a very long day at a very beautiful wedding. So I wanted to let you know a couple of the things that I did end up doing after I wore it, which was, I don't know if I covered this actually in my making, but I ended up removing the horsehair braid from the underskirt, and this was simply because it worked beautifully. The pattern worked beautifully to give you kind of like a pannier kind of look, or a hob de style from the 1920s, something like that. But unfortunately that wasn't quite the silhouette I was going for, and I only decided this after the skirt was fully cut out and fully sewn, which means that these side pleats didn't sit like they should, because they should be sitting out here, and for that they were engineered beautifully, but it wasn't what I wanted. So instead I altered the underskirt by removing the horsehair braid, and I slightly angled the pleats differently and ironed them down differently so that they would sit a bit flatter and give me a more streamlined silhouette. I think it worked well. My favorite bit about this dress was undoubtedly the back. I just feel like it was beautiful, but because I did change the way the fabric was laying, you can tell that sometimes it doesn't lay as nicely as it should, but I don't think this was as noticeable when it was worn. The one thing that was noticeable when it was worn is that because my two layers of fabric weren't together, once I undid the basting here, this was so loose. The silk just wasn't holding the pleat, and so now that I've come back, what I've done was I just by hand I slip stitched this pleat into place, so that next time I wear it, at least that's already in place. And I think the last thing I did was that because I ended up cutting off the train, even though I'd made everything shorter, I hadn't quite accounted enough for the length of the train on the underskirt. So I ended up taking a tuck out of the underskirt only at the back, just to raise it, because the whole purpose of it is that it drapes backwards to support the extra train down here. And since it didn't have that, it was quite visible on the bottom. So I ended up undoing that and just taking it out with a tuck. And now I guess I have to dry clean the dress because it has suffered a little bit. But overall, I think it was a really good experience. I really pushed myself, not just because of the time, the time restraints, but because the pattern was quite complex compared to what I usually do. But it was still a really good experiment, and I did still feel really beautiful when I was wearing it. Everyone was very nice about it, and I think that this kind of style does actually, even though the fabric wasn't totally the best for it, it does actually still make the fabric shine beautifully. So all in all, I would say still a success. Would I do it again? Probably not. Would I recommend this pattern to other people? Yes, if you keep in mind that this illustration is a little bit deceptive and that actually this is meant to be much more like a pannier kind of style. It comes out much farther than this illustration really shows you, or the picture actually, but just keep that in mind. Thank you very much for coming along with me on this whirlwind project. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was helpful if you're thinking about doing this, tackling this pattern or doing a project like this. And if you'd like to see more, like, subscribe or something, and check out my Patreon where I post a lot of things. I might also scan the pattern because I had to so heavily alter it, particularly of the underbodice and the underdress, because I think that's really helpful. It's a really good structure for most sort of formal couture-inspired dresses, so I'm definitely keeping it to reuse for the future. All in all, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all very soon.